All right. Hey, folks. So today's video, I want to help you out with some practical tips on how to make your training more effective, more intense, more efficient as well, and more targeted at what you're trying to do. So I think the message of saying we should all work harder is a good one. Yeah. I've said it in the past. However, without education and clarification, really all it kind of reminds me of is saying earn more money or try harder at school. Doesn't really tell you exactly what to do. It's just more of a general sentiment. And that's good. People like the motivation, people like the kick up the arse. But I think we can go one step above that and actually give people practical advice, which is what I'm going to be doing over the course of this video. 3 practical tips that you can implement today, things that I do to make your training more effective, more intense, and more efficient. So before we get to that, do make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Drop a comment for the algorithm. You guys have been great on that recently. Thank you. And if you're interested in coaching, there's a link in the description. Right. So the first tip that I want to give you will involve you filming your sets. Now, for some of you, that will seem like quite normal. You will film your sets regularly. For others, this will just seem horrific. Like, why, God, I do not want to engage with the youth of today. It's not about that. I think if you've never filmed your sets, then prepare to see the mirage of how you think you're lifting shattered away, because you will be doing all kinds of things which you never realized over the course of the set. It's worth filming and worth looking back over what you're doing. For example, if surely you've looked around at the gym and seen people train, and you've seen how people mess up their sets with form and whatever else. Well, just bear in mind, if you've never seen your sets, that might be you. May well be, because you don't know. So what we're trying to evaluate with this is whether your sets are actually hard or not. They might feel hard, but very often how we feel doesn't really reflect on how we're performing. And that's why videoing your sets is valuable and useful. It's not done for Instagram clout. It's strictly an evaluation tool, which I would recommend you guys do, and I do with my clients. So what we're looking for is rep slowdown. Rep slowdown indicates we are getting to the business end of the set. Typically, what I see is about 3 reps at the end of the set before somebody fails, on average. Sometimes it can be more, 5, sometimes it can be less if somebody is going particularly slow in the first place. But generally speaking, if you're using a regular cadence, what I normally see is about 3 reps slowing down. Bit of slowdown, bit more slowdown, a lot of slowdown, and then the set ends. So typically what I see is rep slowdown on the final 3 reps of a given set. If there's visible slowdown in 3 reps, usually the final rep is very slow. I've seen reps of about 5 seconds in the final rep, maybe 7 seconds, 9 seconds. Those are very, very slow reps. I want to see at least 1 rep slowing down per set to ensure that the set is at least somewhat stimulative. Now, I will say there is some variance in this, okay? So harder sets will usually require less overall volume. So if you are taking every single set to the point where you have significant rep slowdown across 3 or potentially more reps at the end of the set, typically speaking, that will reduce your need for overall volume across the week. And conversely, if you're doing high volumes, you probably don't want to delve into those territories for all the sets. So if you're doing, say, 20 sets or more per week, in my experience, the vast majority of people in that volume range don't really want to take all those sets all the way to failure, as indicated by rep slowdown. I mean, they might think they're going to failure, but it might just not really look like that on camera. So from what I've seen in terms of the average for people to progress, about 8 sets per body part per week will mandate that those sets are trained very hard, and you are seeing significant rep slowdown on about 3 reps per set. Because if you're only doing 8, then they've got to be tough. Now, conversely, if you are doing higher volumes, it probably behooves you not to go all the way to failure or 0 RAR. No approach is better or worse. There are high volume advocates. There are low volume advocates. There is an inverse relationship of intensity and volume. Intensity goes up, volume typically goes down. Volume goes up, intensity typically goes down. If you mix the two, and let's say you have high intensity with very high volumes, usually that can cause problems with recovery, which can lead to tendonitis, whatever. Or conversely, if you have low volumes and low intensity, you're probably not going to gain very much. So make sure your volume and intensity are appropriate for where you are with your current training preference. And I'll also say that there is some theoretical benefit for cycling through both phases across the course of the year, but that's a different topic which I'll delve into at another time. So the first point is look for rep slowdown in your sets. And just to add some nuance to that, you need to match that to your volume. Typically speaking, low volumes mandate harder sets. High volumes can generally do better with lower intensities. Otherwise, you risk overtraining. And bear in mind, when I say lower intensities, they shouldn't be easy sets. They still have to surpass a certain threshold to ensure you're progressing. Okay, that's the first point. Now, the second point in terms of how to make sure you're working hard enough is look for longer and longer intra-set rest periods. So what I mean by that is the rest between your reps. So during the course of the set, there will be a small mini rest between repetitions, or maybe you do them continuously. But either way, what I typically see is people will delay the rep slowdown by allowing recovery between reps. So I see this very common, say at the top of a squat or a pendulum squat, hack squat, whatever. You're in a resting position when you're at the top. People will rest in the shortened position of, say, a squat or a leg press and allow themselves a breath or two extra to recover to do the next rep. Now, my issue with that is this. If you were to carry on and do the rep continuously, you would be forced to do a hard rep in which you can see rep slowdown. If you rest, you are denying yourself that hard rep, and potentially you're denying yourself growth. So sure, you're getting the rep, but it's a perversion of progressive overload because you're not actually delving into the hard reps. You're extending the rest period, allowing your muscles to recover. If that's a bit hard to follow, and I understand it might be a bit difficult to understand, let me give you an example, right? Let's say 1 week you did 5 reps with 100 kilos just continuously, no breaks at all. That was your top set. Now, the next session, you're going back to repeat and improve that performance. Let's say you do 6 reps with the same weight, 100 kilos, but for each repetition, you rest longer before you do the next one. Can that be considered progress? On paper, you progressed. But in practice, it's a far, far easier set. That's not progression. That is a perversion of progressive overload. That is where people get into the realm of progressive overload doesn't work. I was chasing numbers. I never got any bigger. That's how this stuff happens, because people will allow themselves longer and longer rest between reps. Now, just to clarify, I'm not saying you have to do all your reps continuously. What I'm saying is you have to have consistency. So if you have a small amount of rest between reps on a hack squat to allow yourself to breathe and compose yourself, great. Just don't take longer and longer rest periods without having that as part of a plan. Which takes me on to my final point in this. I don't mind if you use this strategically. Okay, if you have a plan, if you're aware of it. So let's say with that example of 100 kilos for 5 versus 100 kilos for 6. Let's say you do go up to 100 kilos for 6 reps, and because it's such a difficult progression, you decide to rest for longer and longer between reps. Now, I don't mind if over the course of the following week or two, you clean that up so that your plan is, I am going to get to 6 reps continuously so that I know I've progressed from 5 continuous reps to 6 continuous reps. That's fine. It's part of a plan. You have the end goal in mind. Doing 6 reps with non-continuous reps is just a form of progression leading up to the next stage. That's fine. I don't mind that. But it's a case of being aware of it. What I see too often is people aren't aware of it. And I originally made a video about this probably a couple of years back, and it really took a lot of people by surprise because they weren't looking out for these things. They were just being preoccupied with weight on the bar. And you guys know me, I am very much a progressive overload advocate, but it has to be done correctly. And this is one of those little nuanced details which a lot of people aren't aware of. Now, I'm hoping you guys, being my audience, are aware of it. So the bottom line is you want consistency in performance. And you have to be aware of how long you're resting between repetitions. Just be aware and be consistent. Typically speaking, on large multi-joint compound exercises, I will quite happily rest for about a second in the resting position and then carry on. So, for example, with a squat or a leg press, very, very good examples. I'm quite happy to give myself just 1 second to just compose myself, stop any momentum, and then go again. It helps to keep the movement secure and stable. With things like pressing and pulling, not so much because you don't really rest anywhere. So I just go for full continuous reps. But it's just a case of being aware of it. If you're not aware of it, you're not going to mentally track it. And if you don't mentally track it, you could fall into the trap of taking longer and longer rest periods and mistaking that for progressive overload. And as a result, you don't get the growth. That's where people think, progressive overload doesn't work. But it does. You have to apply it correctly. So that's the second point. Be aware of your rest periods between your reps. And I know that sounds like it's very pedantic, but it's just consistency, man. That's all it is. I'm just advocating for consistency. Right. The final point I want to make in this video about how to know your training is intense, how to make your training more intense, is to look at your efficiency and your execution during the course of the set. How do you feel afterwards? If, say, after a set of bent over rows, you just feel systemically trashed because during the course of the set, you've been flopping up and down like a fish out of water. Your back is tired, your hips are tired, your legs are tired, your breathing is ragged, everything is just fucked. You think, yes, I had a great set. I don't think that's a great set. You're doing an exercise to target a particular area of your body. Now, I'm not saying you have to target one particular muscle, but if you're doing a bent over row and everything's fucked, well, nothing's trained then. You've turned what should be an effective upper back exercise into a terrible exercise for the entire body. And the only thing that's actually going to get worked is your limiting factor, which is probably going to be your lower back. So you've made an effective upper back exercise into just more lower back work. And then you're wondering why your upper back isn't growing. And then you're wondering why you're no good at pull downs or chins, because you're not training your upper back. The limiting factor in rows, if you're rowing like a fish out of water, is your lower back. It's not your upper back. So this point is not just to do with bent over rows, but it's to do with how do your muscles feel after the set. And once again, because I know people are going to misunderstand me here, I'm not suggesting you try to isolate one particular muscle. But what I'm saying is, if you're doing a bench press, after the set, your chest should feel worked. It should feel significantly weakened. If it doesn't, you might want to look at your execution. It's all well good saying train hard, but you have to train effectively and efficiently. So gauge how weakened the muscle is after a set. A classic example is squats. If you squat and squat and squat and you feel nothing but your lower back, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. That's a classic example. If you bench and bench and bench and all you ever do is feel it in your shoulders or your triceps, you're probably benching wrong. I'll say it once more, but I'm not suggesting you try and turn a compound exercise into an isolation. That would be disastrous and probably be quite injurious. What I am saying is your execution has to be at least reasonably focused and efficient. If you're doing a pendulum squat, it should be your quads which are limiting you. The quads should fail. If you're trying to do a bench press to grow your chest should fail. If you're trying to do a bent over row to grow your upper back should fail, not your lower back. All too often with a lot of guys who lift with really crappy form, everything just ends up being a lower back exercise. And as a result, you don't grow the muscles you're trying to grow. You end up just turning everything into a lower back exercise. Now, some people like that. That's cool. If that's your thing, great. If you're all about like odd lifts and round back and all that kind of stuff, fantastic. More power to you. But for the vast majority of people who are interested in physique improvement like a bodybuilder, I generally think you have to be a little bit more targeted in what you're trying to do. So the third point is pay attention to how the muscles you're trying to train feel after your set. If you just feel systemically trashed, odds are you're not growing much. You're probably going to grow the weak link, which is usually going to be your lower back or whatever else, right? Make sure the muscle you're trying to grow is the one which is being targeted. especially true with things to do with, say, arm work and shoulder work, massively. So there you go, guys. 3 things there which I implement in my own training, which I think are things you can implement today and take a note of. So hopefully that was interesting to you guys. Let me know your thoughts, and do like the video, share it, all that good stuff. All right. Peace out.